Hello, this is Always Hungry's Introspective Insight Project number 2. My name is Beth, and I will be covering Chapter 4, Group Membership Roles and Communication. Basically, it's going to be talking about the roles that each member displayed and how it contributed to the overall group cohesion.
My name is Hallie, and I will be going over the group communication theory, which is how essentially going over how a group can communicate effectively.
My name is Kylie. I will be going over chapter 3, and that's going to be group development. I will be talking about Tuckman's theory because I believe my group embodied his theory.
My name is Josh, and I'll be discussing Chapter 7, listening in groups, and the importance of listening in groups.
Hey, my name is Jack, and I will be doing Chapter 5, intercultural group communication, where I will talk about the importance of using language that transcends cultural and subcultural boundaries.
Okay, there we go. So the group communication theory. There are basically 3 main theories that I personally found the most important. So this is the functional theory, adaptive structuration theory, and the symbolic convergence theory. So there are some groups who make good decisions while others make bad decisions. The functional theory was developed by Hiroko Gorin and their colleagues. Next slide. So the functional group communication theory is a unified and coherent set of propositions, assumptions, and claims that attempt to explain how and why communication is related to the quality of decisions groups make. So for example, in the picture, there is us communicating and coming to a mutual agreement so we could get tasks done in an effective way. So we are coming to an agreement about what time we would be most productive during our meetings. So we found out the 8 a.m. meetings were not working for us. So we instead tended to have 9 p.m. meetings. Next slide. So the symbolic convergence theory, or SCT, is a communication theory that was developed by Ernest Borman, proposing a holding of fantasies and common transformation collectives of individuals into cohesive groups. To foster this cohesiveness, dramatizing or using fantasy roles as significant types of communication evolved in SCT. Our group had the common tendency of struggling to find a mutual meeting time, so we would have to work together to find a meeting time that would work for all of us, as seen in that screenshot. Next slide. Next is the adaptive structuration theory. The adaptive structuration theory, also known as AST, is one of the top 3 theories of group communication. It is believed that group members affect outcomes and call his theory adaptive because he thinks that group members intentionally adapt roles and resources to accomplish goals. In my group, we communicate to adapt to each other's needs. So for example, some of us have really busy schedules because either we're working or whatever's going on in our lives, while others do not. So we constantly work around each other's schedules to find the perfect meeting time that will work for all of us. Next slide.
I am in charge of group development. I will be using Tuckman's linear model of group development. It will be focusing on the 5 stages of group development, which is forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. And that is certainly a mouthful to say fast. I believe that my group embodied this. We definitely had clear moments of each stage. To give a simple description, forming is the beginning stage. This is going to be your first meeting. You're going to get to know everybody, getting to know each other, kind of get a feel for your group and your shared goals and what you will be expected of each other. Then there's storming. This is the stage where most conflict tends to occur. You guys are kind of getting into your roles. You're shifting around, being a little bit more upfront, more direct with what you want from your group experience and what you would like to see in terms of the project or whatever you guys have decided is your goals. And then there's norming. This is a stage where you have your roles and you've set the rules and expectations. Some of them can be unspoken or spoken. It just depends on what they are. Sometimes, there's a very clear unspoken rule where don't speak when someone else is speaking. And then there is performing. And that is when you will finally accomplish your goals. You guys for us, it was performing our first Comcast project together. And then now we're performing right now with this group project. And then lastly, it's adjourning. This is a stage where we will have to leave the group and the group's finished because we have met all of our goals. And the next slide, please. So I feel that our first meeting definitely embodied forming. We were doing I forget we did our first assignment where basically we had to look at each other as covers of a book. We were looking strictly on the outside and very stereotypical answers, and it was very much the opposite of don't judge a book by its cover. I feel like this was a great icebreaker because we definitely got to just answer with what we saw on the surface, and then the answeree, I guess, or who was ever being asked the question got to tell their answer and how they actually were. And I thought that was a very neat way to introduce ourselves. And then there was storming. This was right before our first project. We definitely had a bit of conflict when deciding on how to best organize our first Comcast. We all have our own way of doing things and our own way of accomplishing our goals, and trying to figure out how to accomplish them as a group was difficult. We definitely clashed heads with how we thought we should organize, as clear in our evidence from Discord. But I think that I can say that my group definitely came together and we figured out what best outlines work for us and how to best organize things according to rubric, but also according to how we would like it. Next slide, please. And then there was norming, which is your roles and your unspoken rules. And I think that my group definitely had roles that varied. We decided on a meeting by meeting basis who was in charge of what. Certain people would be in charge of assignments one meeting and different next. Then we'd be in charge of note taking, setting reminders, and so on and so forth, whatever was required of upcoming assignments. But then there was definitely clear roles that were taken. I can say that Beth was very, very much, I guess, lead for a lot of the meetings. And then Jack was definitely more of the jokester, relieved a lot of tension or any kind of silent pauses. And then Hallie was in charge of going and doing a lot of meeting reminders. Then Josh did a lot of recaps and detail oriented. And then I tried to stick onto our agenda for the day and keep us on a steady pace to finish our meeting in a timely and productive manner. And then I think performing. This was our first project. I believe we did a great job. We actually did our run through 3 times before we had a final. We definitely had a little bit of a hiccups in the second one, trying to have a finished product that we were all happy with. But in the end, we definitely had a lot of conversation between each other, and we definitely submitted something that was productive, cohesive, and concise. Next slide, please. And then this will be the end. It's the final stage of journeying. This is when you have met your goals. And after this project is submitted, we will have met our group's goals. And Always Hungry will be at the end. It's always a time to say goodbye. I found this quote, which I really like, which is change is the end result of true learning, by Leo Buscaglia, and I butchered that last name, but I think any change is definitely produced from learning, and I can say I learned a lot from this group, so thank you guys. Passing it on to Beth.
All right, so my chapter was on group membership, roles, communication. Overall, I did want to point out our core values and norms. It is important as a group member to pretty much figure out what the norms are within your group. Because of course, we're all different, we're all strangers. We don't want to necessarily offend anyone, and we all come from different backgrounds. We had a consensus decision style, a continuous rotation of tasks and social maintenance roles. And we strive for all members to be present during each virtual meeting. Our strengths lie in those values and norms. I believe these traits on this slide promoted equal contribution and promoted the quality of the work that was turned in as a group. Things like accountability, careful planning, adaptability, empathy, like some of my group members have said, accommodating to each other's schedules because they do vary. Again, added to our group cohesion, and we connected through life experiences, the shared struggle of being a student and an employee, and brief exchanges of lighthearted humor. Next slide. As discussed in chapter 4, establishing norms and group roles in turn are used to influence members to play their respective parts. It is important to know your role so that you know what responsibilities come with that role. And all roles are important in order to have a group be not only cohesive, but to be productive, to be successful. Additional norms that benefited us were things such as member directness. I feel as if we weren't necessarily distracted. We would have jokes here and there, catch up a little bit, but for the most part, we were pretty formal and to the point, which ties back into our busy schedules that we all accommodated to. Our group was performance focused and persistently checked in on each other's progress. And this is just a diagram that's similar to one of our previous assignments. Kylie did a great job of being a Comcast moderator and producing a refined outline and script, enforced group deadlines, standards, meeting agendas. Jack consistently initiated conversations on brainstorming upcoming assignments and group projects. He always had a joke up his sleeve. Hallie assisted with sending Skype meeting links, encourages group cohesion. Josh, he would always recap at the end of meetings, which is really important, consistently clarifies the detail of each assignment and reminds the group of upcoming deadlines. For me, I strive for a positive group oasis, consistently checked up on everyone's progress and set meeting agendas. Kind of like what was discussed earlier, we all have different backgrounds, and I just have a background where I was a manager for 5 years, so it was just in my nature because silence kind of scares me a bit. But yeah, none of us is as smart as all of us. We are all pieces to a puzzle, and a lot of these assignments took all of us, not just some. For the next slide. Although digital groups, as I'm sure many of the groups have experienced, have its own setbacks with, trying to figure out our technology, Skype video meetings, we all exerted efforts when it came to 100% group participation. If a member was not able to be present, they made sure to stay in the loop. And these are just screenshots of previous conversations where a group member would clarify. We would just make sure that we were all on board for a meeting, and we would discuss our progress and shared our input on our next upcoming project. And that's all for me.
Hey,
Pardon me, folks. So I'm doing the 5th chapter on intercultural communication. And at the top of the slide is just a quick quote talking about how culture is not exclusively the stereotypical ideas of what we think, religion, the ways of dress, or traditions. Now, culture transcends that. And we discovered right off the bat from the first meeting we ever had that there were subcultural differences, at least, between some of us. Some of us expressed difference in our interests in music, in our hobbies. Some of us liked classical music, some of us like death metal, some of us like R&B and rap, some of us are into playing music, some of us were in sports, and some of us were into history. And so right off the bat, we had subcultures that we each belonged to that gave us the opportunity to test our abilities to communicate over and across cultural boundaries. And so this contributed to our conversations in ways that kept me on my toes and kept me interacting with our conversations actively, because when something was said that perhaps I didn't relate to immediately because it was from someone's perspective who had experienced something I haven't experienced yet, it helped to keep me active in the conversations to actively interpret them as something similar to what I have experienced before. So some of you guys are managers. I've never been a manager in any business before. So sometimes when that would be brought up, sure, I didn't relate immediately to being a manager, but I was able to interpret it to something that I do remember is similar to that kind of experience. This contributed to us having busier schedules, like was aforementioned, which also had a hand to play in how we perceive time. There were cultural differences, and some of us were very busy, some of us were a little more loose with our scheduling, and we're okay with that. And that also contributed to uncertainty acceptance and its variations amongst us. It's all tied together. Some of us wanted to be right on the dot with all of our assignments to make sure that schedules were abided by perfectly, and that offered a sense of security, a sense of constructive progress. And some of us were a little more free form with our scheduling and free more often. Ways that we actually initiated this is that we limited the use of language that's subcultural, cultural specific. And so, for example, if I were to say that I'm going to play a tremolo riff in the E minor pentatonic scale with the treble on 10 and the bass on 0, maybe there's some people that aren't into death metal and black metal that wouldn't immediately understand that reference. Or if Josh wanted to use coaching lingo for some of his experiences directing football teams, maybe some of us might not understand some of that terminology. So it is necessary to alter one's language so that it can be understood by somebody who might not be part of the subculture that uses the language you're using. And that is all.
Okay, so I chose to do chapter 7, listening in groups. I chose this chapter because between me and my group, it took a lot of patience and difference of opinions to make these assignments work out. We had difficult times agreeing on what times our meetings should start, and then having everyone show to the meeting because life happens. There are also times where impatience kicked in because of tiredness, but we managed and can improve on this area. This took a group's effort for sure, but remember what it means to listen in groups. And then what it means to listen in group is the communication involves the sharing and understanding of one's explanation, and so on. Next slide. Now, we have the 6 different listening models, which is hearing, understanding, remembering, interpreting, evaluating, and responding. And hearing is making distinctions of the noises you perceive, not hearing the conversation, like when a technical issue occurs in our Skype meeting. Understanding is accurately grasping communication. Example, to understand what is said by listening and hearing the conversation. Remembering is retaining and recalling information. You'll respond appropriately to the conversation. Like if I said the Seahawks were the best football team in the NFL, and then Elizabeth, if I could ask you to quickly repeat what I said.
The Seahawks are the best NFL team in the NFL or something.
And then interpreting is a deep understanding of emotional qualities, like being able to relate and empathize with the overall message. Like in the meeting today with the professor, she talked about having successful relationships, but some of us can't relate. Evaluating is analyzing the validity of communication, coming to ends with the value of what is being said, like is it valid or not? And then responding, crafting and sending feedback to a partner, would be like responding back with words that show you were listening and understood what they were saying. Like if I asked Jack, would you agree or disagree that the song 9 in the Afternoon is a great song? Jack?
I would say that's my favorite song on the face of the earth.
Cool, perfect. Next slide. And then see, I've always been one of those friends where they could come and express their problems because I listen to the conversation and I talk when I need to, and I don't always agree with the information that is told to me. I've been fair and just, but I value the information they trust me with, but everyone isn't like this, especially in a group setting. You see people drift off or distracted, and I wonder what made someone not want to pay attention to a conversation that the person may truly care about until this chapter. So why don't we listen to a classmate or friend's conversation at times? That's because there are habits of listening. Some are effective habits, while these are bad habits. The bad habits consist of pseudo listening, selective listening, defensive listening, and disruptive listening. Pseudo being fake listening, selective listening to certain parts of a message. Defensive is listening with a purpose to challenge the message, and disruptive is stage hogging. Next slide. Now, we're supposed to have slides, kind of like Kylie and Elizabeth, about examples with our group, but since mine is listening, I felt as if we should do a live example and be different. So, Kylie, could you tell me in the next 5 seconds what my 6 listening processes were without looking back?
I can say that it is hearing, understanding, remembering, responding, evaluating, and interpreting.
Oh, perfect. And then, Elizabeth, if you could tell me what the 4 ineffective listening habits were.
Yes. Pseudo listening, disruptive listening, defensive listening, and dang it, I don't know the last one.
3 out of 4. Cool. Selective. And so you all had to have been doing one or the other, effective listening or ineffective listening. Next slide. Now, why is it harder to listen in groups? Well, I learned in this chapter that there are 7 reasons why it's harder to listen in groups, but I found these 4 intriguing. One is, in a typical one-on-one conversation, you're probably going to listen about 50% of the time. Your participation in the group, you're likely to spend 65% and 90% of your time listening. In our group, when we meet, Elizabeth does most of our talking for our meetings while we listen and chime in. 2, unless you know each of the members of a group very well, you may not adequately gauge your knowledge and perspectives on a given topic before it's discussed. And since we just met, we couldn't gauge anyone's knowledge. 3, in a group, you have a less of an opportunity to influence other thoughts and actions than you do in a one-on-one conversation. So like if me and Jack had a conversation privately, I could possibly convince him to do sports. But if we add the 3 girls, then my influence would be a lot more difficult. And 4, in a group, you have lots of time to daydream. Next slide. And lastly, why it's important to listen in groups. It's important because of the advantages, and there are 2 big advantages to listening in a group. One is that it embodies the possibilities. There are so many ideas amongst us, but if we're all trying to speak at once or overrule one another, we wouldn't know what could be possible. And second, we're all different. We come from different backgrounds, cultures, and have different childhoods, or possibly similar ones, but each person's perspective is important, and we must listen to hear to get the best ideas from each other. That's why keys to go along with this would be the principles, importance, and functions. Then you want to learn the skills of why to listen. And lastly, you have to want to listen. And this takes motivation. And we all know if you're not motivated to do something, you won't do it.
And that is Always Hungry's group presentation. To recap, there is many different communication theories and different ways to communicate. There is different ways of group development but there is also many ways of group membership and roles and how you fit into your groups or how your groups fit within other groups. And then there's intercultural, that is not one set example. And then there's listening in groups, and that is Always Hungry. Thank you.